Hegemonic masculinity, as defined by Wikipedia, is a practice that legitimizes man's dominant position in society and justifies the subordination of the common male population and women, and other marginalized ways of being a man. Conceptually, hegemonic masculinity proposes to explain how and why men maintain dominant social roles over women and other gender identities which are perceived to be feminine in a given society. It's that idealized type of masculinity that society tells men they should follow. It's that structure or framework that pressures men to behave a certain way. Men need to be protectors. Men need to be providers. Men need to be violent. Men need to be warriors. Men can never display weakness, and so on, hurting men, women, and MBs in the process. And before you say anything, I'm not saying that all of these things are bad, right? Some of these things are okay. If you want to be a warrior or a protector or a provider out of your own will, and that's how you want to express your masculinity, that's completely fine. As long as you're not hurting innocent people or yourself, that's totally fine. It's like that thing with women who prefer to be housewives or caretakers and follow traditional roles. We're not fighting to get rid of traditional roles, we're fighting to give people the choice to follow them or not, for them to not feel obligated to follow them. However, hegemonic masculinity not only contains traditional roles, it also has seriously toxic aspects that hurt men and society in general. Things like men shouldn't ever display emotions, men's value comes from how big their penis is, men's value comes from how many women they've slept with, a man is only good if they can dish out violence, and so on. And that's what I'm going to try to analyze here today. There's this documentary that's called The Mask You Live In, and it unpacks how this narrow and harmful view of masculinity affects young boys, men, and society. And they start with a quote by George Orwell that says, "He wears a mask, and his face grows to fit it." And I think that's a really accurate way to represent how hegemonic masculinity affects men and society today. So this is going to be more of a rant video of me going over some ideas that the documentary tries to explain. One, because I feel inspired by the documentary, and two, because I want to make these ideas more known to people. And if you want to hear these ideas from the source itself, I'll leave a link in the description for you to watch that documentary. Anyway, let's start. Hegemonic masculinity is like a mask. We tell boys and men how they should act and how they shouldn't act in order to fit this mask. Otherwise, they have no value, and otherwise, they aren't really men. But in the end, this mask is not the real person. It's a fucking mask. It's not the person behind it. It's how we're telling them they should be, but it's not who they really are. The dominant idea of what masculinity is today is not organic. It's actually a reaction. It's a rejection of everything that's feminine. It's proving to the other guys that we're not girls, not women, not gay. It's a type of masculinity that doesn't give men a way to feel confident in their own organic masculinity, but instead, we make them have to prove it constantly. Since we're little, we're taught that we can't talk about being afraid or hurt. We can talk about being pissed off, but we can't talk about being sad, because those emotions are weakness, and men can't show weakness, ever. That's feminine. Men need to be strong all the time, otherwise they are women, or they are like women. And that's bad, because being like a woman or being a woman is inferior. Or some people that might feel uncomfortable with this idea might say something like, well, it's not that women are inferior to men, but somebody has to do these things. Somebody has to play these roles, and they come more naturally to men. That's why men should strive to do these things. As a society, we set men on this path. We make a bunch of assumptions about what natural masculinity is when it doesn't work like that. Also, if it was natural, why should we need to force that on men? Sure, there might be some things that biologically as males we might be more predisposed to lean into. But whatever the hell we're telling little boys they should be, isn't it? That's not it. That's a manipulated and distorted view of masculinity that we are pushing onto them. And there's nothing natural about that. Men don't cry. Showing emotion is weak. Fight back. Get money. Be the best. Be dominant and in charge, always. Men use violence to solve problems. Always go to the extreme. Nothing is good enough. Keep pushing all the time. Even mothers are taught to not hold the child too close because they'll hurt his development. They're taught that he'll become a mama's boy. And being a mama's boy is bad. Or being a daddy's boy is bad. Being a mama's girl or a daddy's girl is okay, but for men, it's not, because being close to a parent shows vulnerability, and vulnerability is weakness, and weakness isn't manly, and you need to be a man all the time. Boys are taught to not talk about pain, because being a man is being resilient. Men are supposed to be sturdy, and showing pain is weakness. That's why there's a stigma for men seeking help for medical conditions or mental health issues. So, when a boy talks to their father about pain, fathers usually give advice on how to solve pain, what to do to be able to not show it, how to be able to withstand it while remaining stoic. But what is missing here is acknowledging the child's pain, letting them know that it's okay to feel pain, letting them feel their feelings while they're trying to help the child find the source of their pain to relieve it. Look, even if we are biologically predisposed to lean into some things, that doesn't mean that we need to force men to follow these things. It also doesn't mean that all men will be predisposed towards these things. And more importantly, it doesn't mean that if you don't follow these things, you aren't a man. Generally speaking, men and women are mostly the same. While men and women might be different creatures, there is a separation between them. We're mostly the same because in the end, we're both human. If you're a Jordan Peterson fan, you might have heard this one. If you give men a psychological test and you give women the same psychological test, the women's bell curve and the men's bell curve will overlap about 90%. But that 10% that remains is what we usually refer to as masculine or feminine traits. However, this isn't completely a biological thing, strictly. Nature and society play an incredibly complex and intertwined role in affecting people's behaviors. So saying something like, oh, well, this is how you're supposed to act because you're male or you're female and you're biologically predetermined to act this way is just completely naive. There's a reason why we still don't have an answer for the nature versus nurture debate. They're symbiotic. They affect each other constantly. There's no way to separate them and examine them individually. But we do know that nurture has an effect on children. And while it might be really, really hard to affect biological factors, we know that we can affect societal factors. Whatever a child is taught during their early years will stick with them for their entire life. And even before they are born, we make decisions that will affect how they experience their gender identity. We paint the walls a certain color. We buy different toys. We buy different clothes. So to say that society doesn't have an influence or has very little influence on a person's idea of their gender, or that gender is entirely biological, is actually a psychological impossibility. Gender is messy. Gender is extremely messy. And it's extremely messy because it's a social construct. And societal interactions and human interactions in general are extremely complicated and hard to study. And complex things are scary, and rightfully so. I get it. Complex things make us insecure and afraid and weary that things might change or that we might know how something works, but we actually don't. And most of society thinks that they understand how gender works, when in reality, nobody knows how it fully works. So they try to simplify things in order to feel more comfortable with this idea. Things like girls' toys are supposed to be pink, and soft and cute and motherly, and boys' toys are supposed to be blue and have camo patterns and be action-oriented and be violence-oriented. But when we try to simplify gender this way, we're pushing children into performing gender how we want it. I'll say it again. We're pushing them to perform gender how we want it, how we think it should be, not how they actually feel. We associate masculinity with sexual conquest, and frankly, it's dehumanizing for both the women and the men. Like, you've heard men boast about before on how much sex they're having with how many different women, and they're proud of that. And sometimes they're even more proud if they've convinced the women to have unprotected sex. It's a display of power for them. Women are trophies to be collected. You have to push yourself to be a player, to be a womanizer, to manipulate and harm women so that you'll be more manly. You need to be aggressive and you need to be predatory so you can have more women to hook up with, so you can go back to other men and impress them with your stories. And the objectification that comes as a result of this standard is, it just goes so deep. Like, you've heard before, who that? I'd like a piece of that. I want to tear that up. I want to hit it. Notice a common trend? That, object. It, object. Tear, violence. Hit, violence. We intentionally and unintentionally teach men to not see the humanity in women. And not only that, but that you need to dehumanize women in order to be more manly. We teach boys and men this reactionary masculinity. We teach them to reject everything that's feminine. Feminine equals bad. Feminine equals weak. And then we're surprised when they grow up and they don't see women as people fully. We set them up. We tell them that they should never be like a woman, and then we're surprised when a lot of these men grow up and they don't respect women, or they don't see them as a human. And it's so fucking infuriating, because in my country, Mexico, violence against women is at an all-time high. We even had to come up with a term to refer to when a woman is killed for gender reasons, femicide. In 2015, there were 426 femicides, and it's just gone up from there. Like, even in 2020, with the lockdown, we reached an all-time high of 969. And that's just the stuff that was reported, and that's just the stuff that was officially investigated as femicide. And that's just the killings. We're not talking about the rape and sexual abuse and sexual harassment and sexual assault, because those numbers are in the tens of thousands per year. Hegemonic masculinity is shaping a lot of these men into murderers and harassers and rapists and abusers. Every day, there's a picture of a woman that's gone missing. And every day, there's news of a story of a woman that was abducted and raped or killed by her Uber driver, or a family member, or a teacher, or a neighbor. And every single day, I have to worry about that news story, or that missing persons picture, or that murder woman picture. That could be my mom, or that could be my childhood friend, or that could be my teacher, or my neighbor, or my high school friend. And not only that, but I also have to think that that rapist or that murderer, that could also be my neighbor, or my childhood friend, or a teacher, or a family member. And I hear story after story about how the women I know, most of them have been either raped or harassed or abused. Like, it's really fucking hard to find a woman in my life that hasn't been raped or harassed or abused. And that just breaks my fucking heart, man. But I also don't hear any stories about how the men in my life have been rapists or harassers or abusers, because there's this whole concept about brotherhood of silence between men that not only affects women, but it also affects men. But that's a whole nother topic for another video. And this concept and these facts have made me doubt every single man I know. And if it's breaking my heart, if I'm feeling this way, I can't even imagine how the women feel. Okay, let me relax a little bit. I'm not trying to imply that all men are perpetrators or that only men are capable of dishing out this type of violence, because that's absolutely not true. I'm just saying that this is a huge issue that we should be concerned about and that we should try to address, and that hegemonic masculinity only perpetuates this issue. But anyways, let's move on. We associate masculinity with economic success. We teach men to link their sense of masculinity with their sense of power, of possession. We teach them to live their entire life, comparing themselves to other men. Because there's always going to be someone with more money and more power than you, so you will feel like you're never good enough. You'll spend your entire life pursuing a goal that's always moving forward, and you'll never be able to catch up. And not only that, but you will never look back at what you've accomplished and feel that it's sufficient. This type of teaching only reinforces the toxic idea that men are tools and that they should derive their value based on how much utility they are providing. And as soon as they stop providing utility, they stop being men. They stop being people. This plays a huge role in male disposability and men feeling worthless and unwanted most of the time. And you might think, or you might say, well, how the fuck are men so afflicted if society is designed to cater to men? But I disagree. Society isn't designed to cater to men. Society is designed to cater to hegemonic masculinity, but not the actual men. If you, as a man, fall outside of hegemonic masculinity, there's no place for you. You're shunned, you're rejected, and you're forgotten. Sure, most men will still benefit from many aspects of hegemonic masculinity because they still partake in many of these behaviors, but they also deviate from many of these behaviors, and when they do, they still feel the backlash. We associate masculinity with athletic ability, size, strength, skill set, but athletic ability has nothing to do with being a man. Like, if you see a bunch of boys playing basketball on a school patio, not all of them want to become professional athletes. Some of them want to do computers, or music, or science, or debate, or theater. You need to be bigger and stronger and faster, and you need to always be pushing yourself. You need to constantly prove yourself to the world. And, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with having a little bit of ambition. There's this intoxicating feeling that you get when you keep working hard at something and you become better at it. When you practice so hard that you become better than everyone else. But if you only live to do that without any rest, well, it's going to take a toll on you and the people in your life. If you spend your entire life constantly having to prove yourself and constantly thinking that you need to go beyond, well, there's a high chance that you won't be spending it trying to find out what you actually want. And if you want to be the best at something, that's completely fine. Just make sure that's actually what you truly want and not you trying to fulfill someone else's expectations. There's also this huge myth that says sports build character, but sports don't build character. Coaches and parents and teachers and guides and tutors and yourself, that's what builds character. The reason why a lot of men are less likely to show empathy or be understanding or feel comfortable while being vulnerable is because they weren't given empathy or understanding, or other men weren't vulnerable with them when they were children. This is also why they are less likely to raise children with these things in mind. And speaking about raising children, let's take a look at a lot of the men that people admire, or the men that other men admire. Whether it's police officers, or military, or entertainers, or rappers, or movie stars. A lot of what they're teaching is domination, and aggression, and extreme stoicism. Even fictional representations in media, we have the strong, silent guys who are always in control, unemotional, and violent. And even media representations absolutely have an effect on people's behavior. If that weren't the case, then the entire advertisement industry would collapse. Even in rap and hip-hop today, which have been dominant cultures in entertainment for a while now. And I'm not saying that it's just rap and hip hop, and I'm also not saying that it's all rap and all hip hop, but a lot of the representation that you often see, it's all about the money and the power and selling drugs and being a hard ass and having a lot of bitches and respect and legacy. But a lot of these people are just displaying what they were taught masculinity is and should be. So they, in turn, teach it to other young men, and the cycle continues. Look, all I'm trying to say is that hegemonic masculinity is a thing, and it's a thing that's imposed onto us, and it's not natural by any means, and it's not only reactionary, but it's also manufactured, and it's harmful to not only men, but society in general. We need to stop forcing or pressuring people into strict gender roles. What can we do about it? That's an extremely complex question because there's a lot of answers, but also a lot of those answers are extremely hard to do. When you see these types of behaviors in your male friends or in your community, call them out. And I don't mean that you should start a full-on fight or a full-on debate every time one of the men in your life calls women bitches or objectifies women. First of all, most people don't have the energy or the disposition to be fighting constantly on the internet all the time, and much less in real life. I mean, I might do, but I enjoy it, and I grew up arguing with people my whole life, but I wouldn't expect that from anyone else, because it's tiring, it's extremely tiring, and it's disheartening, and it's also not the only way. Changing someone's mind, like really changing someone's mind, takes a lot of time, like months or even years, and a lot of effort, and they have to have a relationship with you, and they have to respect you and hold your opinions as valuable. Making videos about it or trying to educate people who are willing to listen is also extremely valuable. But if you do have the energy and the opportunity and the disposition to do it, at least sometimes, well, I think you should do it, because we need to tell the world that we're not okay with these types of attitudes anymore. And I'm also not telling you to walk up to random strangers on the street and start lecturing them on why what they're doing is wrong, but at least try to do it with your friend group. And I know that it's really scary, because like I'm the guy, or I'm the person in my friend group that's always preaching about how it's harmful for them to act this way, and people can sometimes get tired of that. You also have to know how to pick your battles, because if you overdo it, well, people will just start distancing themselves from you, and you will become an outcast. So it's really tricky, but if you can do it, you should do it, because it needs to be done. Also, if you see people actively speaking out against hegemonic masculinity, support them. Let them know that they aren't alone, because a lot of times it feels that way. Or if you see men making an active effort to ditch hegemonic masculinity and trying to reconstruct themselves, well, don't let that go unnoticed. And like I mentioned in one of my other videos, it's not give men a cookie for doing the bare minimum for being a decent human being. It's more like give men a cookie for actively fighting against a system that's been ingrained into them since birth, and that will make them outcasts for fighting against it. There's a lot of tactics and strategies that we can use, and all of them have their valid applications depending on the situation. And the more diverse tactics we have, the more likely we are to succeed. But in the end, if you can, do something. And there you go. I'm wearing a vampire shirt because I forgot I had it, and why not? Also, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, show it to all your friends, do all the things, please. I'd appreciate that. I also have a presence in Twitter, Twitch, TikTok, so if you could follow me over there, I'd also appreciate that. And if you think that if I got anything wrong, or I said something really stupid, just also let me know in the comments. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching.